All right, my friends, here are five big stories for today. So the first is that we want to talk about the incursion from Ukraine into Kursk. And it's really something. It's far more than I thought it was yesterday. Here's a little follow-up on what's gone on. A state of emergency has been declared in the Russian border region of Kursk as troops continue to battle against alleged Ukrainian incursion. And if you go down, Russia's chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, told President Vladimir Putin that a unit of Ukraine's armed forces numbering up to 1,000 people went on the offensive. That's the highest number that I've heard so far in the Kursk region on Tuesday morning. The Russian Defense Ministry said on social media that the enemy's movement further into Russian territory has been prevented. Sure, it has. Originally, and you can go back to my video yesterday, originally they were saying we stopped them at the border, and then we stopped them tens of meters into. No, it didn't happen. They rolled right over and they started kicking rear end and taking names. But the operation for the destruction of the Ukrainian army units is continuing, says Gerasimov. Putin said that Ukraine was carrying out a large-scale provocation. You're in a state of war. What do you mean a provocation? They can't cross your border like you've crossed their border? That's ridiculous. By the way, I talked about this morning in the daily brief, so you can see this here, or you can go back to yesterday's daily brief and see it there to get the full story of what has happened in Kursk. Okay, second big story. Warily, U.S. companies eye co-production deals in Ukraine. So this would be U.S. defense contractors working on creating something within Ukraine. And then if you produce it in Ukraine, now it's Ukrainian made, you may be able to use it in Russia. Okay, several U.S. Defense companies are considering joint production inside Ukraine, but questions remain about the safety of doing business in a war zone, the persistence of corruption, and the long-term business case. So really, yeah, you don't want to get your things destroyed. You have to deal with potential corruption. All those things are legitimate, but if they can work this out, it'll be pretty significant. The official pointed to last month's announcement from Northrop Grumman that it will make ammunition inside Ukraine. It's the first public deal between a U.S. company and Ukraine to produce weapons inside the country, and there are companies that are looking at what they can do next. Now, that could be significant, like I said, but you have some things that you have to worry about. First, you're in a war zone. No one wants to get their facilities blown up or employees getting hurt. Number two, corruption's still a concern. Now, it's less of a concern than it was just a couple of years ago, but it's still there. And then three, companies are trying to gauge what kind of local or regional markets might outlast the war, since it would take years to get a new production line up and running. Now, Ukraine is going to be the hub for military armament in the years to come, in my estimation. So there's a business case to be made that long term, this is a good idea, but they have to make that business case. It can't just be a short term, just turn this out for a year and then you have to run your lines. No, they have a lot of creating the line to create the munitions takes a lot of time, energy, effort, and there's risk involved. Another sticking point for U.S. companies is whether they have political risk insurance, essentially financial protection for their investment in Ukraine. It could get blown up and they need to be able to assess that kind of risk or the probability of that risk. Broadly, however, the U.S. government wants companies to do more with Ukraine. So that's a positive sign that they're looking to do this. This came from defense1.com. Okay. Third big story. So this is Kyiv Post. Ukraine's defense ministry discovers 3 fake military registration sites. First, I was scratching my head. Fake military registration sites. And then it dawned on me, oh, that's bad. The ministry detected 3 fake web applications that mimic the country's Reserve Plus application used for military registration. On Sunday, they warned of Russian attempts to collect Ukrainian data through fake Reserve Plus applications. That's pretty twisted. It's clever on Russia's part, but it's pretty twisted, and cautioned citizens to stay vigilant and only rely on credible sources. Okay, do not follow links imitating the name reserveplus.mod.gov.ua ending in top or website or org. When downloading the application, you have to be sure you have the right one. Reserve Plus is a mobile application and web portal introduced by the Ministry of Defense on May 18th when new mobilization came into force. And now they have a few million, I think it's like 4 million or maybe almost 5 million that are registered through Reserve Plus. That doesn't mean that there's 5 million going into the military, but that they are in, it's like selective service in the United States that they can contact if they need to mobilize. Okay, growing threat to Russian influence on UK social unrest. Okay, so what Russia is doing with their cyber warfare, this hybrid war that is partly military and partly economic and partly cyber and partly political, it's pretty astounding. Recent events in the UK have highlighted the extent to which external actors, particularly Russia, are leveraging disinformation through social media against existing societal tensions to foment unrest. So what they do, and this came out in Putin's Playbook, the book, Putin's Playbook, get a hold of that book. It's awesome. What they'll do is they'll just amplify whatever existing tensions there are. So they'll amplify both Black Lives Matters and some white racial something at the same time so that you can have society at each other. This tactic, particularly aimed at creating racial strife between religious and ethnic groups, poses a significant threat to the UK's social fabric and stability. The UK has a diverse population. It's a complex tapestry of ethnic and religious communities. This diversity also creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by malicious actors. Incidents over the past few weeks in Leeds and Southport and elsewhere in the UK have shown how misinformation and disinformation can rapidly escalate local tensions into significant social unrest. So, for example, you had that situation in Southport and here in Leeds, and it's just been really they're intentional about inflaming and ratcheting up the drama. And so you have to be aware of that. You be aware of that too when you're arguing with people on Twitter or other social media. Okay, next big story. Niger becomes second African state to cut ties with Ukraine. So what's going on? Niger's ruling military junta has announced it's breaking off diplomatic relations with Ukraine, becoming the second African state to sever ties with Kyiv following comments by a Ukrainian official perceived as lending support to rebels in neighboring Mali. Okay, so you remember what happened in Mali with the Wagner fighters that were killed by the separatists. Okay, Ukraine has to comment on Niger's move, which comes after Mali's military rulers on August 4th also cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine over its alleged involvement, which Kyiv denies, in an attack by rebels that resulted in the killings of dozens of Malian soldiers and Russian mercenaries. Armed groups in Mali's predominantly Tuareg, and we'll come back to Tuareg in just a moment, north, said that they killed at least 47 government soldiers and 84 Russian Wagner mercenaries. And this included like the commander at Bakhmut and the guy that ran Gray Zone as well. Okay, so what's going on? So right here, it was right on the Mali-Algerian border, not too far from Niger. This is like traditionally Tuareg kind of real estate. They just kind of lived in that section. They weren't worried about where the map was carved up. And yeah, so that's what happened there. Now, countering some of this, Kaliba is having talks in other countries, Malawi and Zambia particularly, and he's about to go to Mauritius shortly. Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, has said that he was satisfied with the talks in Malawi and Zambia and highlighted the importance of the need to communicate with African partners so that Russian narratives do not poison the position of African colleagues on Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia is very active in trying to spin a narrative that they are in favor of all these Russian governments, usually authoritarian governments, and they're the only ones that support you. And it's Ukraine. They're trying to keep you from having food and all kinds of stuff. And Africa, for which they literally all the biggest players in the world are fighting, is a place where Ukraine has opportunities and we must strive for them. So I commend them for actually working on that. Okay, last few stories. Jake Bro was in the Kyiv Post, and there was a video and an interview with him. Bro, in this exclusive interview with the Kyiv Post, explains what internal pressures Russia is now facing that could well lead to the world's largest country into a brutal defeat. Okay, and then there was also one with Georgie from Ukraine Matters. Georgie breaks down what Russia's advances mean and what it could signal for Russia's future strategy and weighs what Ukraine is likely to do in order to stall Russia's westward quest. So good on both of them. Last little bit, I talked about what happened with the vice president's election yesterday. As you know, Kamala Harris has just selected Waltz to be her vice president, and she could have picked Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Now, I'm not going to go back into that. I talked about that yesterday, but I saw this and I thought, wow, that's freaking clever. While Shapiro holds a home state advantage in Pennsylvania, Governor Waltz commands the 1st Minnesota Regiment. He's from Minnesota, by the way, which has a proven record of keeping Pennsylvania blue. So blue was the color of the North in the Civil War. Blue is the color of the Democrats. That's what they're talking about. In this goes back to my favorite movie, Gettysburg. And in what happened here, the regiment's most famous action occurred on the 2nd day of the Battle of Gettysburg, when Major General Winfield Scott ordered the 1st Minnesota to charge into a brigade of 1,200 Confederate soldiers. This action blunted the Confederate attack that helped preserve the Union's precarious position on Cemetery Ridge. By the way, I highlight a lot when I talk, because I'm trying to show you that I am like credible in my sources, that here I'm not just making stuff up. This was from this article. It was in the Kiev Post. It was in AP. It was in whatever, because I want to be the credible Hulk. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.